Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer and welcome to Best Kept Plans. Today's video is going to be an October 2024 reading recap. If you're interested in seeing what books I read last month, please stick around. You might hear my Keurig in the background because I am currently making some coffee. It is very early on Saturday, November 9th. I just have a lot of different things I want to accomplish today, so I was trying to take advantage of the early daylight hours, especially because it gets dark so early now with daylight savings. So my coffee is brewing. We're going to be talking about books that I read in October 2024. I read a variety of books, I guess I'd say, in content, in rating. I didn't have any books that were absolutely terrible in the month of October, which I'm really happy about. But I also did not have any 5-star reads. So, you know, that happens. It's okay. But of course, I love a month that I have a 5-star read. I am excited to talk about all of the books that I read in October. I definitely wanted to lean into spooky season a bit, but I didn't want all of the books that I read to be spooky Halloween-esque reads because I felt like I would get pretty bored with that. I tried to do that a few years ago and it just didn't work out for me. Okay, coffee is made. I usually drink black coffee when I drink hot coffee, but I had some non-dairy Starbucks caramel macchiato creamer from making iced coffees for myself over the summer, and I'm really trying to use it up. So the first book that we're going to talk about is a book that I received a digital ARC for, and that is What Does It Feel Like by Sophie Kinsella. I'm a big Sophie Kinsella fan. I've read a ton of her books. Most of them I read before I started making videos here on YouTube or talking about books on YouTube or Instagram, but I have read a couple of her releases in the last few years. She never disappoints for me. I absolutely love her writing. It's so funny, it's so witty, it's so sweet and charming. This book is a novella. It deals with someone who is diagnosed with a brain tumor, and if you follow or know of Sophie Kinsella at all, she was diagnosed with glioblastoma a couple of years ago. It was an emotional read, but it still had all of the wit and charm that I love from Sophie Kinsella books, and I really enjoyed reading it. I wish it was longer. I wish there was more, but I understand why there probably isn't, and I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I want to talk about is my favorite book that I read in October, and it is an unexpected one, that's for sure, and that is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I decided to listen and read this at the same time because I felt like I might have a hard time getting into it with it being in the horror genre. I'm really glad that I read it that way just because I'm loving reading books that way right now and it enhances my reading experience. This was not at all what I thought it was going to be in the best possible ways, even to what the twist is, which I kind of sort of thought a little bit about throughout the book, but then was hoping it wasn't because I didn't want it to be done in a disrespectful way. And at the end of the day, I feel like Catriona Ward accomplished the twist being what I thought it was in a respectful way and in a way that I think brings light to what this book is dealing with. Really liked her writing style. I enjoyed this very much. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. After reading 2 books that had a bit more intense subject matter, I wanted something that was a little bit lighter. And so I ended up picking up The Wedding Witch by Erin Sterling. This is the 3rd book in a series that she's had going on along with The Ex-Hex and The Kiss Curse. I really liked The Wedding Witch. I definitely think it's a great read for around Christmas time, for the winter time. I read it in the fall because I received a digital ARC of it, but if you're gonna read it, I'd definitely read it in December. I think it would be such a great December read. It's a romance. I liked the mutual yearning in this story. I liked the plot in terms of what our female and male main characters like were thrown into and what they were trying to figure out. I definitely think the ending kind of left some things on the table that I wish would have been explained or would have made some connections that I thought would have just further enhanced the plot for the reader. I overall had a really good time reading this, and I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. I decided to jump into a real true fantasy after having read The Wedding Witch, and that was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. I was sent this review copy by Bramble, so thank you so much to them for that. I know that this is about vampires. I haven't read anything vampire-esque in a really, really long time, so I was excited to dive in. I didn't hate this book. I liked this book, but I did not love it. And I think that's how I feel a lot of times about the first book in a series, especially in a fantasy series. There's a lot of setup in this book. There's a lot of explanation in this book, and that's not a bad thing at all. Sometimes it makes it a little bit more challenging to like dive deep into what the true story is, dive deep with our characters. I thought the ending was definitely very interesting. It is not what I thought it was going to be, which I liked. I'm definitely looking forward to reading more books in this series, in this universe. I just haven't picked them up yet. I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. After reading The Serpent and the Wings of Night, I once again wanted something that I thought was going to be a little bit lighter. And so I ended up picking up Rules for Ghosting by Shelly J. Shore. I received this review copy from Elle, so thank you so much to them for sending this to me. This is not what I thought it was going to be. I don't know why, but from the cover, I really thought this was going to lean romance. And there's definitely romance in here, but I would say this to me leans more like general fiction, contemporary fiction, and that's not a bad thing. I enjoyed the story. I liked our characters. I liked that we got to dive deep into subject matter having to do with gender identity and sexual orientation, having to do a lot with grief, which yes, you can read about grief all the time if you want to, but it was dealt with in a really interesting way, and it showed grief and how that can look different for different people in different situations. And I appreciated that. I did listen and read along at the same time to this one, and I'm glad that I did. I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. After Rules for Ghosting, I definitely wanted to lean a little bit more spooky again. And so I ended up picking up a book that is on my list of 24 books in 2024. And that is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I knew that this was fantasy. I think I had heard that this leaned more fairy tale and kind of like creepy fairy tale, and it definitely does. I really enjoyed it, actually. I never read something like this. To me, it's kind of a mixture between a fantasy and adventure novel with fairy tale-esque plot points, I guess is how I'd say it. In a lot of ways, it reminded me a bit of The Hobbit, but definitely the tone was different. This has a much more eerie tone, which I really liked. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I think it was a great read for October. Next, I decided to pick up an ARC that I received off NetGalley. This one, I didn't really know what it was, but the title was so funny that I decided to request it. And that title is Houseplants and Their Effed Up Thoughts. This is basically like a little coffee table book, I think. And it's a picture book. It has pictures of different plants and the ways that you would care for them. And it's definitely got a lot of humor in it. It's meant to be funny. And there were definitely aspects of it or parts of it that were funny. But I also felt like the humor bordered on being mean a little bit, which I didn't really like. It was a little bit insensitive at times, and so I struggled with that aspect of it, but could see how someone who's a plant lover with the right kind of sense of humor could enjoy having this book. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up a book that was also on my 24 Books in 2024 reading challenge. I did listen and read along to this, and that is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was a really interesting way of telling a story. I liked the lessons learned by our main character. I could understand her desire to see what else is out there, having been so immersed in depression and low self-esteem and low self-worth and a bit of self-loathing, and her coming out on the other end of it, I found to be uplifting, and I liked that. And so I did give this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really, really enjoyed it. Could definitely see myself reading another Matt Haig book in the future. After reading The Midnight Library, I decided I wanted to read another romance. And I also decided I wanted to read something that was not at all paranormal, supernatural, fantasy, anything like that. So I decided to read The Dixon Rule by Elle Kennedy. I read this on my Kindle. I didn't like this one quite as much as The Graham Effect, but I still really enjoyed it. There's pretty heavy subject matter in this one, and I do think people should look into trigger warnings. It's a lot of the story. It's throughout the entire story. I thought that it was handled in a pretty realistic way when you're thinking about people who are 20, 21, 22 years old, while still trying to clearly show who's in the right and who's in the wrong. So I appreciated that. Obviously, the steaminess was steamy. It definitely spent a decent amount of time setting up our next book in this series, which I think is called The Charlie Method. And I'm very intrigued to read that when it comes out. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. After finishing a romance, I wanted to dive into a mystery thriller because I had not read one yet in the month of October. And so I picked up Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I was very, very interested to see how I was going to feel about this one. I've read 2 Riley Sagers in the past. The first one was The House Across the Lake, and I gave it, I think, 4 out of 5 stars, but looking back, that's really more of like a 3 to 3.5 star read from me. His last book, which I'm totally blanking on the name right now, I rated 5 stars. I really, really liked it. And so this one, I was super curious to see where it was gonna land for me. I will say, I didn't love this one. I thought it was an interesting story, but I don't know that I felt like it was intriguing enough or interesting enough to really hold my full attention. I listened to this while reading it, and I think that's what really allowed me to get through it as quickly as I did. I think if I hadn't been listening along, it would have taken me a really long time to force myself through this one. It wasn't terrible. The writing is still good. It's just that the story wasn't for me. And so I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. The last book that I read in the month of October, I received this as a review copy. I was so excited to get this in the mail. And that is Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. This is another novella. I don't know where this would fall in terms of genre. I almost want to say it's got like science fiction vibes to it. It's a really, really interesting story. I actually listened and read along to this one as well. I thought the setup was really fun. I thought it brought together some very interesting characters, some very different characters. And it was cool to see the dynamics between them and the way they interact with each other. I thought that the mystery-ish element to the story was fun and different. I think reading it in October just like really made it hit for me. And I really liked that it had, I don't want to call it an ambiguous ending because it really wasn't ambiguous, but there's not any finality to it. It just kind of ends off. And I don't know that a lot of people will like that. I think more people will not like that. But I actually really enjoyed that part of the story. So I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Really, really enjoyed this. So those were all the books that I read in October 2023. In terms of my top 3, my favorite book that I read in the month of October was definitely The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. For my second favorite book of the month, I'm gonna have to give it to The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. The Last House on Needless Street and The Midnight Library are both 4.5 out of 5 stars, but I had like 3 or 4 out of 5 star reads, and so it was pretty hard to figure out my third favorite book of the month. But what ended up clinching it for this book was that I wanted more. It was a 4 out of 5 because I wanted more, and that is the book we just talked about, The Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. And so that's my top 3. If you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video, please do not hesitate to put a comment down below. I love talking with people about books, and I'm always very curious to hear people's thoughts on books. And that's it. As always, everyone, please be safe. Bye-bye.